Lagos was loud. It sang in horns and yelled in street shouts. It rolled with traffic like waves in a storm and never rested, not even when the sun sank beneath the belly of its mainland. But in the middle of all these chaos was Chris Adekunle, a man who epitomizes calmness and gently demeanor. He was a mystery, even to himself and his neighbors with no friends. He had little or no interest in social media, no extravagance, no stories of clubs or late nights of social activities. What he had was focus, purpose, and an unusual sense of calmness for someone living in the wild heartbeat of Africa's most intense city. He wasn't flashy, and his apartment in Lagos mainland was only big enough to serve his purpose in life for the time being. His clothes were clean, unbranded, and pressed. His shoes were never loud. And his car? A 2002 Toyota Camry he kept clean and spotless. At 33 years of age, Chris was the kind of man who could walk through a storm and emerge unnoticed. Tall, dark-skinned, soft-spoken, and disarmingly humble. What no one knew, and not even his neighbors, not even the people at the church where he volunteered once a week, was that Chris was quietly sitting on the edge of billionaire status. He had successfully and completely built a software product which was on the verge of getting sold to an international firm under an alias company name. Negotiations and protocols were already 92% conclusive. All the transactions were private and all the equity transfers were ready to proceed discreetly. Meanwhile, when Chris was not focusing intensely on his laptop running queries and solving issues with an eagle eye, he drove Uber, a cab-hailing service with his Toyota car, to cover his immediate expenses. Driving people around the beautiful city of Lagos also helped him feel grounded, cool off his head from intense logical and creative technical work on his laptop. Uber work gave him clarity, perspective, and his own way of serving humanity. "I just like being part of people's stories," he often told himself. It was on a breezy Thursday afternoon when he got the ping. On a fateful Saturday morning while doing his Uber job, he got a ride request notification and he checked his phone screen and saw, Bimber Adetunji. Ikoyi. The address looked upscale. As he pulled into the estate, tall white columns framed the house like it had walked out of a movie. Flowers bordered the driveway, 2 guards nodded as he drove into the compound through the opened gate. He looked at his rear view and saw the security men closing back the gate immediately. He swallowed the beauty of the compound in one gulp while admiring the fleet of luxury cars. The front door opened and out came Mrs. Bimber Adetunji, a vision of elegance. Not overdressed, not powdered to perfection. She wore a beautifully tailored Ankara gown, with minimal jewelry. Her beautiful smile was warm as she entered into the car and the security guard shut the car door. Chris was still wondering why such an elegant lady preferred to enter his car. He was still wondering when the lady greeted him the moment she got comfortable in the car. A mortified Chris was completely humbled with guilt, and he nodded with a gentle bow. "Good morning, Ma." She smiled, as confirming the fact that she knew that her presence had just unsettled Chris. "Please, call me Bimber, I am good with just Bimber," she said, looking out through the window of the car as if talking to someone outside the car. But Chris never did. She was Ma from that moment forward. Their first trip was to a charity meeting at Victoria Island. Along the way, she asked questions. "What's your name?" "My name is Chris, Ma." Chris responded respectfully. "There you go again," she said casually looking into her purse. But Chris knew that he couldn't call her by her name and he just wished that she doesn't talk to him anymore so that she doesn't force him to address her with Ma. "Full name?" she inquired. Chris smiled and said, "Chris Adekunle." "Nice name. You seem very polite and gentle," she said. "Thank you, He paused himself from mentioning Ma at the compliment he just received and then he smiled calmly. That day, after he dropped her off and helped her carry bags into the building, she pressed something into his hand. "Your number," she asked and exchanged contacts. Save mine too. I'd like to call you when I need a ride again. And so, a strange relationship was born, one based on quiet respect. She called him quite often and Chris was always there to render his service. The more Chris drove her, the more he saw and appreciated what he considered to be a down-to-earth humility. Their home was something out of Architectural Digest, sleek, modern, minimal but luxurious. Chief Ardatunji, her husband, was a billionaire in the telecom sector but kept a low profile. The kind of man who owned luxuries to his comfort and yet often wore the same plain white kaftan. Chris saw the cars but never asked questions. Of course, who will he ask and why? He observed how the couple treated each other with matured and teenage flair of love and affection, with kindness and mutual respect. It fascinated him. Billionaires were not supposed to be this human. This wasn't a story from folktales or movies but real-life experience. Sometimes, Bimber offered him food. One day, she brought him into the house when it began to rain. Come and sit inside for a while and allow the rain to subside. Our son and daughter will be coming home soon from the US. Maybe they'll get to meet you and probably me needing your services when they don't want to drive, she informed him nicely. Sitting on the edge of the couch, Chris only nodded, sipping his juice in silence. Something in him, some small, aching space, longed for the warmth that filled their home, the anointing touch that manifests such grace that filled this home and the lives of the people dwelling in it. December arrived in gold and glitter with festivity all over the city. The Ardatunji's home came alive with Christmas music and new laughter. Dami, their son, returned first from the US. A tall, cocky but good-natured 25-year-old finance graduate with a Harvard degree and an obsession with cryptocurrency. Dami was everything you'd expect from a rich kid. Loud and proud with the air of confident all over him. Is this our driver? He asked the first time he met Chris. Chris nodded. No, he is not our driver. He is an Uber driver that I call whenever I needed his service, Mrs. Ardatunji corrected. That means the same thing to me and it's cool, Dami said. But can you just park your car and let us use one of ours if you don't mind please? No problem, Chris said and parked his car while Dami gave him the key of one of the luxurious cars and they drove off in it. Hope you don't mind me playing music. Chris didn't and Dami blasted Afrobeats all the way to the club. Days later, Kunbi, their daughter came back home for Christmas. Her name was Kunbi, but her Americanized spelling added the Y for flair. She was 23, stunning in natural beauty with a figure that was seemingly created for modeling conquest, reserved, and dangerously intelligent. Her mother often said she could read people like books, and Chris, it seemed, was her next mystery. Chris first met her when he came to drive them to a Christmas party at the Civic Center. She was different. The moment she stepped out of the house, Chris could feel it. She walked with a quiet grace, wore no makeup but radiated beauty, and had eyes that scanned the world like an X-ray. She slid into the back seat without forgetting to glance at Chris behind the wheel, and said nothing for the first few minutes. Even when Chris greeted, her response was shallow as though his greeting was not welcomed. She was quiet. Chris felt she was not just in a good mood or she was probably sizing and analyzing him to form an opinion. Then, just as they crossed Falomo Bridge, she spoke. You don't talk much, she said. Chris was surprised to hear that coming from her and he smiled. Most people prefer it that way, he responded. I'm not most people, she replied calmly. They shared a look in the mirror. For the first time in a while, Chris felt something stirred. But he quickly reminded himself who he was, at least in their eyes he was just a driver. Just a driver. She gave a tiny smile that did not go without Chris noticing. My mom talks about you a lot. They spoke little that day. But the air between them hummed. He only had the opportunity to pick them for shopping a few days before they traveled back to America once. By January, all transactions regarding the sale of his software was done and dusted and payments was fully and completely made. Chris had quietly multiplied his fortune through his other business interests, offshore investments, real estate flips, and cryptocurrency movements. Chris was currently a billionaire that was still struggling to maintain a low profile. Yet, every week, he still took Mrs. Arditungia's calls. He still drove her around, still helped her carry shopping bags and still greeted the gatemen like brothers. The family often offered him food, water, even a new phone in appreciation. But he remained modest. He dressed simply and still drove his clean Toyota Camry to their family home, even though he had a Mercedes-Benz and Toyota Hilux parked in a newly acquired duplex on the mainland that they didn't know existed. It was Easter when everything changed. Chris had been called several times to drive them around with no tension and no mystery. His scanty-worded conversation with Kuhnby had remained casual but a little cordial. On a day that was specially set for a new tune, Mrs. Arditungi had called Chris to pick up Kuhnby and her friend from a high-end lounge in Victoria Island. It was dusk and Lagos was beautifully lit in orange and shadows. Chris arrived a few minutes earlier to pick her home, and waited outside the bar. It wasn't a place for people like drivers. But Chris knew the owner. He had once worked on their systems networking and CCTV installations at the bar. Out of curiosity, he decided to quietly sneak inside to buy bottled water and have a peek of the bar on a busy business night. That was when Tola, a model and old friend, spotted him. "Chris? Is that you?" She beamed curiously right into him. They hugged and she made some exciting noise as she hugged him. She ordered him a drink and Chris accepted and paid the bill himself. They laughed and caught up for about 10 minutes and then Kuhnby walked in. She saw Chris first. Saw Tola. A tall, elegant lady in a deep red gown. She was laughing, her hand resting lightly on Chris's arm as they spoke. She noticed the expensively tailored shirt that he wore. Somehow, she imagined that she just saw the quiet confidence of a man who didn't belong to anyone's background. It was a side of Chris she had never imagined. Who was the woman? Why was he dressed in a designer outfit, sipping expensive whiskey, and talking like a man who owned the room? She froze for a second and then approached. Chris smiled and stood to his feet when he saw her. "You're early," he said, and Kuhnby could have sworn that she saw a wave of guilt across his face. "You clean up well," she replied, her eyes narrowing. Tola smiled. "You know Chris too?" "Apparently not like you do," Kuhnby replied flatly. She looked curiously at Chris and blinked. "You know her?" "A friend," Chris replied with a gentle smile. "She look expensive though," Kuhnby complimented, but Chris offered no explanation. Kuhnby studied him with her mind reeling. And she turned and walked out towards his car while Chris followed with anticipation. The ride to the house was as he expected. Silence that was surrounded with the traffic noise from other road users. That night, she told her mother everything and asked her how well she really knew him. While in bed, she was completely immersed in the sea of Chris's mystery world. She was neither sad nor worried, but she was just not able to break off the grip of captivity that only has Chris's name written on it. She recaptured the entire scene of the evening over and over again in her mind and analyzed every look in detail. Every impression she got from the Tola and the effect that it had on her made her concluded on one thing: jealousy. Jealousy? Why? Why in the world should I feel jealous? She said out loud to herself in her dimly lit bedroom. No, I think I am just mad at the embarrassing shock and I am certainly going to unravel the mystery as soon as possible, she told herself. Emotion got stirred as curiosity grew. Mrs. Arditungi was curious. The next time Joe came to pick her up, she watched him carefully. "Joe, my daughter said she saw you at a bar, dressed like a CEO, she said, half laughing. Are you hiding something from us?" Chris smiled but said nothing. Over the next week, Kunbi couldn't stop thinking about it. Somehow, she remembered his gentle smile when asked just a simple question, and she thought it looked cute. But who really was he? She didn't think they should get rid of him, but instead, keep him close and find out who he really was. She began watching him more closely, how he spoke, how he opened doors for her mother, how he answered questions without ever saying too much. She noticed his phone. It was the latest iPhone. His watch, too subtle, but clearly not cheap. One day, she casually asked, "So Chris, did you go to university?" His first response was his usual smile, then he said, "Yes." "Which one?" she inquired further. "FUTA. Studied computer engineering," Chris informed. "Ever worked in tech?" she asked, and Chris remembered that her mother had already informed him that her daughter read people with ease like a book, and he wondered what chapter of him could she be at the moment. He nodded. "Once or twice." And that was all, but that drove her crazy. One afternoon, when she knew her mother wouldn't be home, Kunbi decided to follow him. She monitored when he was bringing her mother back home and placed order for a ride to wait for her outside the house, just by the next building. The moment Chris drove into the compound, she greeted her mother and quickly excused herself. She hurried into the ride that was patiently waiting outside and instructed the driver to follow Chris without suspicion. The moment Chris came out of the compound and drove off, the driver did a good job as instructed. She found his real house in a quiet, secured neighborhood in Lagos mainland. She parked across the street and watched for about 30 minutes. Then she generously paid off the driver and crossed over the house. The gates opened, and Chris emerged, wearing simple clothes but stepping into a matte black G-Wagon that just arrived a day earlier. She blinked and swallowed as a wave of fear grabbed her, but she stared, unsure of what to say. The house wasn't rented. It was owned. And clearly expensive. She stepped into the middle of the gate to enable him see her, and Chris spotted her instantly. "You followed me, madam," he said, not angry but just amused. "How can I be your madam?" she said, looking straight at him as if expecting a discreet reaction. "Why did you lie?" "I never lied. I just didn't share," Chris corrected. She crossed her arms. "So who are you really?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he remotely shut the gate and reached out to her and held her by the shoulder with aura of confidence that she was noticing in him for the second time. "Come on in and I will tell you." He motioned her and led her into his well-furnished smart living room, in which he commanded with words, for the curtain to be opened and the television to come on and tuned to a particular station. She sat on the couch amazed and unsure of what to think. She realized why she was jealous. She knew it was love. Her intended investigation of him was just actually a walk into a deep hole of emotion. She was overwhelmed with the feeling of a betrayed lover in love, but abandoned in her space to make a decision. "I'm still Chris. The man who drives your mother. The man who believes respect isn't based on status." And then she asked, "Why didn't you let us know?" He hesitated. "Because the moment people know you're rich, they stop seeing who you are. They only see what you have. Your mother is the nicest and most modest woman I have seen in my life. Apart from Dammy, your family taught me a very great lesson in life. Now I know that all rich men are not the same. Some are actually human. So, in response to your question, I didn't let you know because you may stop calling for my driving service." She was so nice to me from the very first day she got into my car. When Kunbi returned home, her face was unreadable. Her mother asked questions. Her father noticed her silence and of course, Dammy began snooping. The weeks that followed were strange. Kunbi couldn't stop thinking about Chris. It was something deeper than what she thought initially. She craved his company and wanted to see him talk. Her fantasy repeatedly played a scene of Chris, sitting beside her and talking to her softly with his gentle smile that has become a trademark, while she just admired and watched him talk. And then, the feel of his hand on her shoulder, guiding her into his living room. Now she realized what that feeling was. It wasn't her shocking discovery, but something deeper. Now she understood why she felt the way she felt when she saw the intimacy between him and Tola. Kunbi now visited him more. Sometimes under the excuse of needing a ride. Other times, just to talk. He cooked for her. Mrs. Ardatunji had called him to come over and take Kunbi to a salon in Victoria Island, but when Chris got to her house to pick her up, she typed the address of where she was going to and handed her phone to Chris while stifling a smile. Chris started typing into his Google map when he realized that she just gave him the address to his own house. He looked at her in the rear view and their eyes met. Chris smiled. "Ma, are you sure that this is the right address you want me to take you to?" "What is wrong with the address that I gave you, sir?" She crossed her arms and responded, and the "sir" was intentionally emphatic. He took her home and they stole over 1,000,000 glances at each other along the way. Chris only smiled each time their eyes met. When they got home, they quickly settled down with some orange juice while Chris cooked for her. When Chris asked her if she would eat, she wasn't hungry, but watching him cook skillfully and the aroma in the kitchen got her starving. "Deception is not the only thing that you are good at," she said to him. "That's right, I am good at so many things," Chris said while pushing his dining chair aside and picking up his empty plate. "What else do I need to discover about you?" she asked, and Chris smiled and said, "Everything good." "Like what else?" she asked him with a smile back. Chris reached over to collect her empty place from the table. He stretched for the plate, but his lips intentionally caught hers. He dropped the plates on the table and gently stroked her hair, and then, the sides of her face with his palms. His lustful eyes pierced deep into her. Then he kissed her again with more feelings. Chris picked the plates to the kitchen and washed them while a dumbfounded Kunbi was left struggling to regulate her breath. After spending some quality time together in his house, it was time to leave. As they got to the door, Kunbi held him tightly and kissed him passionately. Then she looked into his eyes and asked, "What if I don't go back to the States?" "Why? Don't you have something doing over there?" Chris was surprised. "It is way better here." "Why are you not in America? Isn't it better here?" "What if I get there and start feeling the urge to see you?" "How do I fly back?" she said. Chris stamped a kiss on her lips and said, "Your family have a special place in my heart. Don't let me ruin the impression they have about me." One evening, Chief Ardatunji sat his wife down. "Who is this Chris, really?" "I don't know. But I trust him," his wife responded confidently. "He wants nothing. I think he may have more than we think. There is something about him that is keeping me on the edge. Nothing dubious, but something. Maybe I will tell Kunbi to ask him personal question, so that I don't seem to be interrogating him if I asked him myself." Dami wasn't so gentle. One of his friends in finance sent him a link, an article on the acquisition of a tech company. The founder? J.O. Adakunnel. With a blurry photo that looked unmistakably like Joe. He traced Chris's alias company and uncovered the tech acquisition deal. When he saw the sum, over $75 million, his jaw dropped. That night, during dinner, he blurted out, "Did you all know our driver is a billionaire?" Silence. Kunbi looked down to conceal her guilt of hiding her discovery. Bimber gave a tiny smile. Chief Ardatunji's fork paused midair as Dami read aloud from his cell phone, his findings about Chris. Chris was invited to the house and the card was laid on the table. Dami's findings was revealed and everyone sat still, looking at Chris and expecting him to say something. Chris had never felt so exposed in his life. He was calm and quiet, wondering what could be his best approach to make things right without denting his image to the family. He stood up slowly and reached into his pocket and placed a card on the table. Chris Adakunnel. Founder, Tech Africa. Then he paused, wondering what to say, but suddenly, instead of outrage, Chief Ardatunji stood up, walked to Chris, and extended his hand. Mrs. Ardatunji looked at Chris, feeling betrayed after opening her doors and embracing him to the family. She wondered if he was harmful, but doubted the possibility. Chief Ardatunji stared, his expression unreadable but deep within him. He admired his humility, gentle and discreet nature. He had no iota of suspicion of a ulterior or dubious intention. He just saw in him a young man who only wanted to play on a low key. "I never meant to deceive. I just didn't want the attention," Chris said, looking at Chief Ardatunji. "And my daughter?" Chief Ardatunji asked calmly. Chris glanced at Kunbi. "She's not part of the plan, she's just someone I am in." He paused, but everyone got the picture. "She is someone I care so much about." Kunbi smiled faintly when he stammered. She said loudly, "I care about you too." Chief Adakunal congratulated him for his success and offered to be there for him if he ever needed any help in his own capacity. Then he excused himself and went upstairs. Dami picked up his phone and stood up saying, "Well played," and walked upstairs after his dad. They began seeing each other openly. They went for long drives, this time, with him in his own car. They ate suya by the lagoon. They talked about purpose, about balance, about faith. One day, Chief Ardatunji called Chris privately and asked, "Can you protect her? Love her? Honor her?" Chris answered with a joyful smile of reassurance, "Yes, sir. With everything I am." Kunbi never returned back to the States and they simply got married in a private chapel. A weekend honeymoon in Obudu in Cross River State. 2 months later, they went on vacation in Paris. And so, a new chapter in the lives of Chris and Kunbi began. As one. For love and in love. Please subscribe if you enjoyed the story.